So we've run deficits. So why do governments run deficits? Well, for the very simple reason that if the government didn't run a deficit, there would be no money in the economy. If you doubt that, I'm going to ask you to do a little exercise when you're listening to this. Open your wallet, purse, or wherever else you might happen to store a note, if you're one of those people like me who's old enough to still use cash, and have a look at it. And what that says on it is, I promise to pay the bearer on demand. Now, that's debt. A promise to pay is debt. That's all a promise is. And what have you got in front of you? You've got a debt. That is literally the government's debt. Now, as I often say to audiences when I'm talking about this, if you don't want your share of the government debt, which is made up of the £20 note in your pocket, please leave it at the door when you're leaving and I'll take it off your hands for you.
This is the MMT Podcast with Patricia and Christian Riley. Hi, I'm Christian Riley and welcome to episode 8 of the Modern Monetary Theory podcast. You just heard our guest this week, economist and author of The Joy of Tax, Richard Murphy, talking about what the UK government deficit actually is. Hey, guess what? It's your money. And if you don't like the government deficit, Richard invites you to send him your portion of that evil deficit for him to dispose of. That's nice of him. As the man credited with a lot of the early thinking behind Corbynomics, we talked to Richard about Labour's fiscal credibility rule, and it would seem that it's a far cry from the way Richard envisaged his ideas playing out. We also talk about the difference between fiscal policy and monetary policy, Keynesianism, neo-Keynesianism, the zero lower bound, Venezuela, Weimar, Zimbabwe, and I mispronounced the name of Umberto Eco. So, something for everybody. I should mention that Richard keeps a really good blog at taxresearch.org.uk, so you can get in touch with him there if you'd like to send him any government debt you don't want. And please, please, please get in touch with us if you have any questions, and we'll do our best to answer them. On Twitter, we're at MMT Podcast, or there are more details on how to get in touch with us at the end of the show. We hope you'll learn something or have your curiosity stimulated while you're listening to this. And if this is your first exposure to MMT, you can get up to speed by listening to all of our episodes from the beginning. We really need some adults in the room when it comes to economics and policy, and I'm hoping that you, me, us will become those adults, because the systems designed to create those adults have become quite dysfunctional. Anyway, let's dive into some Richard Murphy.
I'll keep talking for England. What would you like me to talk about? What I had for breakfast? What I'm planning to have for supper?
I wanted to, first of all, go through the fiscal credibility rule and try to get maybe Labour Party members and other progressives out there to understand, first of all, what it is and why it matters and why you have reservations about it, as well as many other progressive economists.
So I'm going to come up in here with point number 1. Labour will close the deficit on day-to-day spending over 5 years. Is that good, bad, neutral? What do you say, Richard Murphy?
What do I say to that? I say it's completely unnecessary. It ignores economic reality. Let's stand back from this and think what that really means. What it says is, first of all, that the government has no money of its own. And that's not true. The government creates all money in the UK. What do I mean by all money? Literally every single pound is, in a sense, created by the government. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that they own all the money in a person's bank account. But actually, if the government didn't back that currency, and if it didn't back the banks who actually lend most of that money into existence, because we now know, and the Bank of England have confirmed, that money is created by banks lending money to borrowers who then deposit it when it becomes savings. If there wasn't this system of money creation which was government backed, then there would be no money in the economy. Now, the government can do the same thing for itself. We know it can do that because quantitative easing has proven in the last decade that the government can create money and effectively, literally put it into use in the economy without any cost to a taxpayer. And it's done that. £435 billion of money has been created by the government, put into circulation in effect, and we have not had any inflation as a result or anything. So the government is not dependent upon taxpayers to fund it. Now, that isn't to say that actually taxpayers do not pay the government, and it isn't to say that the government doesn't want taxpayers to pay it, because if the government funded all its activities without taxing, we would end up with inflation. I mean, that's simply beyond debate. That's obviously going to happen. But the reality is that the government has three choices of funding for its activities, all the funding starts with it creating money, and then it can either use quantitative easing and literally say that money was printed, or it can borrow money, which is a way of extracting the money back from circulation to stop inflation, or it can tax to bring the money back. But to say, as this first part of the Fiscal Credibility rule does, that Labour will close the deficit on day-to-day spending over 5 years, implies that it has got to somehow balance its books, and that there's a virtue in balancing its books in its own right, as if good bookkeeping in the way that Dickens wrote about it, 19 and 6 are spending a week, 20 shillings income equals happiness, 20 shillings a week income and 20 shillings and sixpence, and I should translate these into currency for people who are not familiar with shillings in a second, then it equals unhappiness. Just to put that record, that would be 97.5p income and £1 income. £1 income.
Richard, you're like the Umberto Eco of economics. We've got to have David Foster Wallace, who's just going to have every footnote.
We'll have every footnote under the sun in here.
Can we? Yeah. Let me just jump in there and ask you. We've said deficit many times so far. What is the deficit, Richard Murphy?
The deficit is basically the difference between government expenditure in a period and taxation revenues generated in a period. Now, to put that in context, at the present point of time, I'm going to do another footnote. £800 billion of government expenditure a year, near enough. And in the current financial year, 2018-19, something like 760 billion of expenditure. So a deficit, which includes the cost of investment, of 40 billion in the current year. So that is what the deficit is. It's different from the debt. Let's just make that point very clear. The debt, which is called government debt, although I dispute it ever is debt, but the debt that is described by commentators on television and by politicians is the total value of all the deficits that have ever been run cumulatively by the government. Now, we started running government deficits in 1694. That's kind of a long time ago. And almost every year since 1694, there have been odd exceptions, but most years since 1694, we've run a deficit. In other words, government spending has been bigger than taxation revenues. And so the deficit has grown over time. The vast majority of the current deficit, which notionally is coming on for £2 trillion, not quite there yet, but around that sort of sum, it was accumulated in the last 10 years. Most of it under Conservative governments, of course, therefore. And the Conservative governments have always borrowed more than Labour governments, as I have shown by my research over the last 70 years. Without exception, on average, Conservative governments have always borrowed more than Labour governments, including in the period before 2008, just to correct any impression that this is something because of the crisis which has been distorted. So we've run deficits. So why do governments run deficits? Well, for the very simple reason that if the government didn't run a deficit, there would be no money in the economy. If you doubt that, I'm going to ask you to do a little exercise when you're listening to this. Open your wallet, purse, or wherever else you might happen to store a note, if you're one of those people like me who's old enough to still use cash, and have a look at it. And what that says on it is, I promise to pay the bearer on demand. Now, that's debt. A promise to pay is debt. That's all a promise is. And what have you got in front of you? You've got a debt. That is literally the government's debt. Now, as I often say to audiences when I'm talking about this, if you don't want your share of the government debt, which is made up of the £20 note in your pocket, please leave it at the door when you're leaving and I'll take it off your hands for you. Most people, in fact, nobody has ever accepted my invitation to do that. It's really strange. People actually like government debt. It's something which actually is really valuable to them. And what we have to understand is that government debt is private wealth. And you inherently know that the moment you have a £20 note, which you call your own. The government says it owes you this money, and you think it's really valuable. Now, therefore, government debt, is it really debt? Or is it actually private wealth? And what would happen if we actually did repay? It's the paranoia which is implicit in the first part of this fiscal rule, which says the government must balance its books. We mustn't leave, as David Cameron used to say, and others like George Osborne used to say, we mustn't leave this pile of debt to be repaid by future generations. What they were actually saying was that future generations were going to literally cancel all cash. There isn't an economy in the world that can now function without cash. And by cash, I don't just mean that printed stuff. I mean all money. Because all money is guaranteed by the government at the end of the day. It's its job to create this money. And without it, we're in deep trouble. So this isn't debt which is ever going to be repaid. This is private wealth which the government has created to assist us to run the economy effectively. Why should Labour want to prevent the increase in the amount of debt that the government puts into the economy? And I'll tell you why it shouldn't do that. Because a growing economy, and we have got a growing economy for two reasons. One, actually, we do have small levels of economic growth in real terms, 1% or so. But even so, with an economy of 2 trillion a year, 1% still comes to quite a lot of money. That's 20 plus billion a year. And we also have inflation, which is running at 2% or so, which is another or 40 billion or so of extra money required a year to make the economy go round. The government's got to produce, or somebody's got to produce, that extra money. Now, if it isn't the government that puts that into the economy, then private banks who can also create money, but only under license from the Bank of England. That's, after all, how we identify a bank. We identify a bank by the fact it is licensed by the Bank of England. So therefore they are sort of outsourced money creators on behalf of the government. You can't create money, I can't create money, but they can create money under government license. If the government doesn't put this money into circulation by running a deficit, then it must all go into circulation by increasing private debt owed to banks. And that is deeply dangerous for an economy, because we know that's exactly how the 2008 financial crisis happened. We know that it was a private debt crisis that created that whole near meltdown of the world economy. And I mean near meltdown. It was that close to actually collapsing altogether. And it's private debt that's the danger here, because that can bring banks down. If we have a choice, government is the better creator of money to meet the needs of the economy for extra cash to literally wheel the motion which goes on in the economy every year. So I just simply think this is a bizarre plan to transfer the whole thing to the private sector, to private banks, to create private debt when the government should be saying, this is fine, we'll create it instead.
Okay.
So in the rule, there is quite a lot of emphasis on monetary policy and something that they call the lower zero bound. And it seems to me, and perhaps you can clarify, a monetary policy effectively means trying to encourage private debt as a means to generate demand.
Monetary policy is a complex issue. I mean, and, we could be here for the next 24 hours talking about monetary policy, and I'd probably still be going, but nobody else would be. So how do we summarize monetary policy?
Why do they prefer it to fiscal policy?
That's an excellent question. First of all, because it actually can be done through the banking system, and banks are, of course, largely privately owned, and monetary policy, by and large, has worked in the past by controlling the interest rate. In fact, that is the whole basis on which monetary policy works. And of course, banks make money, or they did used to make money, on the difference between the rate they charged people and the rate they paid people. And when interest rates were quite high relative to now, I mean, I'm well aware there are some extortionate interest rates out in the economy still, but for mortgages and for company lending, which actually makes up the vast majority between the two of them of bank lending in the UK, interest rates are really quite low. And the deposit rates, which you can earn if you have any spare cash to put in the bank, are, of course, pitifully low. But the actual margins they can make are tiny now compared with what they used to make. So banks loved monetary policy because they used to make a margin of 2+% on all the money they could hold, which people would lend with them because they were lending it. And I know that in theory you don't lend out people's money. It's actually a difference between the cost of capital, what people lend to the bank, and the cost that they charge the lenders. They aren't the same money, but they do influence the way the bank finances itself, and they made a price on the difference. So bankers loved monetary policy because it increased their profits. It's as simple and straightforward as that. It was part of the whole Friedman-inspired, Chicago University-inspired approach to supply-side economics that became really powerful in the 1970s and was a rejection fundamentally of the Keynesian approach to economic management, which had dominated post-war thinking from 1945 to the mid-1970s. The economics of Lord Keynes, a British economist, dominated the world's thinking. It was fiscal policy. Fiscal policy stimulates an economy or depresses an economy when that's necessary, because sometimes governments want to depress economies because they're over-exuberant. Like teenagers, sometimes they need to actually be grounded, put on the naughty step, or whatever else you wish to do with those who need to be punished. Well, fiscal policy can both excite an economy and suppress activity in an economy. It excites the economy by the government spending more than it gets in tax, and it suppresses the economy by taxing more than it spends, fundamentally. Now, I've already said that over history, we've normally spent more because governments actually have noticed over a period of well over 300 years that markets are not very good at actually putting all the resources that are available in an economy to work, in particular people, and in particular people at living wages. We have lived with poverty for centuries, and we still do live with poverty for centuries, and governments realise that in democracies, and of course we've gradually developed something approaching a functioning democracy in the UK. I believe in proportional representation, hence my reservation about that. But we have a democratic state, and having people living in poverty does not encourage people to vote for governments, and so they want to relieve poverty. Now, that means you've got to stimulate the economy. If you want to do that with an interest rate policy, you cut the interest rate. You reduce the cost of borrowing. Now, so long as interest rates are sufficiently high, and this would be true for interest rates, government-based interest rates of 3% plus, then you can cut the rate of interest and you can still have a 2% price difference between what you pay to people and what you lend to people at. Once you go below 3% or so, there simply isn't a 2% profit margin left. And so banks make less money. So banks don't like being forced into the current situation, which is called the zero bound. Zero because actually our interest rates since 2008 have effectively been zero. In real terms, inflation adjusted, of course. In fact, our real interest rates are negative. And the government can actually borrow money, quite absurdly at present, at negative interest rates. In other words, people, once inflation is taken into account, buy government bonds and earn an interest rate of 1% or so, but inflation actually means they're getting less money back than the fall in the value of the pound. So they're actually subsidizing the government by lending it money. Now, that means that we have no effective area where monetary policy can work anymore, because monetary policy requires positive interest rates. And this is why the zero bound is mentioned so much in Labour's fiscal rule. Labour's fiscal rule, it says, only works when there is normal time. Normal time is when there are interest rates with full profit margins in them. At less than 3% or so interest, base rate interests, then we're into abnormal times. And we've been into abnormal times for a decade now. There is absolutely no sign on the horizon that we're going to move out of this period of very, very low interest rates. Even if Mark Carney gets his current wish, and one of staying at the Bank of England, two of being in control of monetary policy for another few years, and three, as he's put it, having another 2 or 3 interest rate rises over the next 2 or 3 years, the base rate of interest in the UK might just reach 1.5%. We still won't be out of the zero bound in any foreseeable future we've currently got. So this is one of the big problems we have with actually the fiscal credibility rule. It makes no sense because, in fact, it's never going to work because there's never going to be out of the zero bound. But that's just pointed out that that's a real problem with it in the first place.
So at least that's in there. It literally says when the Monetary Policy Committee decides that monetary policy cannot operate the zero lower bound, the rule is suspended. So
yeah, but there's a big problem in what you've just said there. Can I just raise that?
Yeah, please.
Yeah.
The big problem is it isn't down to a Chancellor, Labour or anybody else to decide whether monetary policy won't work. We have to wait for some bankers to tell us, monetary policy doesn't work. Now, I don't elect Mark Carney.
Yep.
If I did, would I vote Mark Carney? That's another issue. I'm not going to comment on that. I hope some influence through the ballot box on who might Chancellor. I certainly have an opinion on who should be Chancellor. And I want the Chancellor to make the decision about whether we're going to use monetary or fiscal policy or which bit of both. I don't want him to have to go begging to the Governor of the Bank of England, an unelected Canadian, and say, do you mind if we do some fiscal policy now, please, Mark? No, sorry, that's not on. That is not democratic control of our economy, run in the interests of the people of this country. That's handing over the control of the economy to some bankers, unelected, who do not have the interests of the economy as a whole at heart, because they simply don't know about the economy as a whole. Most of the people on the Monetary Policy Committee are not representatives of society at large. Rather too many men, rather too white, rather too rich, rather too, therefore unbalanced in their overall approach, rather too many bankers as well, let alone far too many economists, and that's really dangerous. I want actually to have somebody with more political nous than that in charge of this decision. So a bad element in there as well from Labour to pass control on this decision to the bankers.
Yeah.
So there's a few members of the Monetary Policy Committee who are ex-Goldman Sachs, or am I wrong to say that?
There have been members of the Monetary Policy Committee who are ex-Goldman Sachs, including, of course, Mark Carney himself, the Governor of the Bank of England. I mean, there have also, let's be clear, been some notable people who have dissented with the mainstream line of thought on the Monetary Policy Committee. One of those, David Blanchflower, now working in the USA, a professor of economics, was at Sterling University now, at Dartmouth in the States. I mean, and David, or Danny, as I admit he is known to his friends after that famous, if you're old enough, Tottenham footballer, and he is known as Danny to his friends universally, I think. He and I have cooperated on some issues, and sometimes I think there isn't the width of a fag paper between the two of us on policy issues, because he has pointed out time and time again how wrong the economics used by the Monetary Policy Committee have been. They use a deeply neo-Keynesian policy. Now, that sounds like good news. That's that word Keynes in there. Unfortunately, there's a massive difference between Keynesian thinking and neo-Keynesian thinking. Neo-Keynesian thinking buys the whole logic that the market knows best, and it is the mainstream thinking of the Bank of England, and most modern macroeconomists are in fact neo-Keynesian in a sense. It's pretty much the same as neoclassical for all practical purposes these days. Pure Keynesian is saying fiscal policy rules. There isn't room for fiscal policy in neo-Keynesian thinking as such. Why? And I'm summarizing grossly in a sense, but not totally. Why isn't there room? Because it gives a role to the government as an economic agent who can make decisions to affect change in its own right. And that is simply absolutely unacceptable to those who promoted monetary policy from Milton Friedman onwards. So it is a deeply anti-democratic, anti-government policy that is implicit in the whole logic of having an independent central bank with a monetary policy committee. I would never have gone down that route and think New Labour got that wrong in 1997 when this was the policy created by Gordon Brown and Ed Balls.
I think there's also a discussion to be had about the efficacy of monetary policy when it comes even, above the lower zero bound. It's questionable how effective it is.
And it's also certainly not what you'd expect from a left-wing Labour Party, a genuine left-wing Labour Party, to just throw fiscal policy under the bus.
I mean, my understanding is that Simon Wren-Lewis and Jonathan Portes drafted this policy in a paper, if I'm right.
Near enough of these wordings. There are some wordings in this policy which they would not have used. We have a reference to the government's credit card in Labour's fiscal credibility rule, which is a direct lift from David Cameron. I mean, enough to make you cringe. They so played on Tory territory on this one.
If any of the listeners are interested, by the way, the paper that we're referring to came out on May 20th, 2014, discussion paper number 429 from the National Institute of Economic and Social Research. It's called Issues in the Design of Fiscal Policy Rules. That was written by Jonathan Portes and Simon Wren-Lewis.
And the fiscal policy, the bit where it talks about the credit card is when it says Labour believe that in the medium to long term, government should not need to borrow to fund their day-to-day spending, while there are exceptional times when shocks from the private sector mean that the government has to step in to help. Everybody knows that if you're putting the rent on the credit card month after month, things need to change. That's a household analogy.
This is a complete household analogy. This is a complete failure to understand that because that rule may be true in the household, eventually households cannot borrow without limit because, households can't print money. Therefore, they've got to bring in enough money to eventually pay their debt, or they go bust.
I have to pull you up. We've been told via Facebook by Ellis Winningham not to say print money because it confuses everybody. He doesn't like that. So
Do you know Ellis? Actually,
it's keystrokes or something.
Yeah.
It is keystrokes. Printing in this sense is an electronic term.
Yeah.
I don't mean literally we turn on a physical printing press, although technically that is possible. I mean, in the UK at present, there's about 80 billion of currency, notes and coin. But there's actually the total money supply in the UK is around £2.8 trillion. Just to put that in context, 80 billion is 80 with 9 noughts at the end, and 2.8 trillion is 2,800 with 9 noughts at the end. So obviously the vast majority of money is electronic. That's what we're talking about, creating electronic money here. And the government can create as much electronic money as it likes. It's created 435 billion literally by tapping numbers into a computer at the Bank of England to bail out banks, to keep asset prices high, to provide liquidity so that the banks could carry on paying their bonuses and not fall over in the event of another financial crisis coming, which I think will happen. That's the whole problem. But back to the household analogy, which is where we were, this is a fundamental failure. Just because there are lots of households in the country does not mean the country is like a household. The country itself is the exact opposite, in fact. Why? Because a household is dependent upon getting an income in to meet its costs. But at the country level, one person's income is, of course, another person's expenditure. And likewise, one person's expenditure is another person's income. So we don't ring fence around the household and say it's just got its own income and expenditure, and we don't just look at those in isolation. We look at the total sum of economic activity for a government. And in fact, creating money you was careful there, I didn't say printing, creating to make sure that there is the credit that is needed in the right place at the right time so that people can actually be put to work, so we can create full employment at least a living wage, which is, I think, my goal for an economy as an absolute minimum, but sustainably as well, because I've got a decidedly green tinge in me as well as a red one.
So do we.
Yeah, so put those two together, and what we're trying to look at is building a long-term sustainable economy in which people can service each other's needs at a living wage. That's fundamental. That's how I'd almost interpret the jobs guarantee. And this is about, therefore, ignoring this household analogy, because it understands if we're at a macroeconomic level, the government level, that I repeat the point, one person's spending is another person's income. So if you cut spending to balance the books, you are by definition cutting income as well. In fact, you're spiting your face. And there isn't this problem of maxing out the credit card, because you can always pay the credit card bill, because you can always create some new money. Remember what Paul Krugman, Nobel laureate, said in the States about the problem of US government debt, which runs to trillions and trillions of dollars, vastly more than we can imagine. In the States, there is a limit on the value of a note, as we have in practice in the UK as well. I mean, we don't have anything above a £50 note. But he noticed that, in fact, there was no limit on the value of a coin that could be created in the States. So he said to those who had a real problem with supposedly repaying the government debt, he said, it's no problem at all. The government can repay as much money as it likes. We'll just create $1 trillion coin. Yeah. And there's absolutely no reason why it can't create $1 trillion coin, and it could theoretically turn around and repay the debt using $1 trillion coin.
That was a big missed opportunity, I think. There was a movement, wasn't there? And it just kind of, and then even the people in the movement went, we're only kidding.
You can't even steal it, though. I mean, who accepts it? Who accepts $1 trillion coin? Can't get change for that.
But it shows that the government has never got a problem in repaying its debt if its debt is owing in its own currency. Now, let's make that point very clear. We are often told, well, I'm often told, but what about Venezuela? Currently, What about Argentina? What about Turkey? Those are all countries with current economic crises around the value of their currency. If we go back into the past, what about Zimbabwe? What about the Weimar Republic? They went bust. Why can't we go bust? Of course, it's the same. No, it isn't. Why isn't it? Because each of those situations involve debt in currency of another current country. So Venezuela owes money in dollars. Argentina owes money in dollars. The Weimar Republic owed the French in francs and us in pounds and the States in dollars in the 1920s. It didn't owe in whatever, the Reichsmark, was it at the time? I can't even remember which particular mark it was that failed in the 1920s now. Failure on my part. Mark me down for getting this part wrong. If I said the right
gold mark, yeah.
No, it wasn't the gold. Oh, anyway, whichever one it was. But they weren't paying in their own currency. We in the UK have less than 1% of our total government supposed debt denominated in anything other than pounds. We bizarrely, because George Osborne chose to do this, actually have a small amount in Chinese renminbi. Why? God knows. Stupid idea, completely bizarre, absolutely crazy. I hope it will never be repeated. But we owe our own currency, so we can't default on our debt. That's the difference between the household analogy and the country. Households can, of course, default. We can't. Households have a very defined income. Our national income is our national spend. They are the same. That's double entry bookkeeping actually requires that.
So that brings us nicely to point number 2 of the Labour fiscal credibility.
Have we only got point number 2?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Thanks for that sound check.
I'm going
to press record now, if that's okay. So number 2. Labour will make sure government debt is falling.
It actually says Labour makes sure government debt is falling. They can't even get.
I know. I thought it was my typo as I was reading it, but it says Labour makes sure government. big trouble.
Can't even
Labour
write it
right. Labour makes sure government debt is falling at the end of 5 years. So let's say it like they're meant to say it. Labour will make sure government debt is falling at the end of 5 years. I mean, can you unpack that a little bit?
Well, I can unpack that in two ways, because there are two interpretations of this. One is absolute debt is falling, and I've already talked about what that would mean. That would mean, actually, if government absolute debt is to fall, it's got to therefore run a surplus. What that means is it must tax more than it spends. In other words, we must pay the government more money than the value we get back from the government. Now, there are lots of very complex ideas about the relationship between taxpayers and government and how we view the value of that relationship. And there's a lot of deep philosophy around this social contract, or do we view it as a market relationship where we're buying something, and what value do we put on it, and so on. And we're actually, the evidence is we're not very good at valuing what the government supplies for us until we're in a crisis. You know, we don't really value the NHS until we've arrived on a trolley in A&E with a blue light flashing, and then you have no limit to the price you put on the value of the NHS, especially if it's your child. In my experience, been there, done that. So, you know, it's very complex to work out what value we put on it, but very few of us could understand why the government should charge us more persistently in tax than they supply in value back to us. In fact, the evidence is very clear that people do not like government squeezing services. The whole experience of austerity and the fact that we're worn out by the whole austerity process indicates that this is something people won't tolerate for long. And of course, the historical evidence of that is clear. Otherwise, why would governments have run deficits for so long? It's much easier to run a deficit than run a surplus. So that's one way of interpreting this. Labour is going to run a surplus. It's actually going to take money out of people's pockets and leave them worse off and provide them nothing in exchange. Wow, what a socialist policy that is. What
that's no different to what the Conservatives have been bragging about in the last couple of years. They promised a surplus, they've delivered a surplus, and we're all getting poorer.
Precisely. We are literally getting poorer.
Well, the difference, I guess, is that they want to tax the rich on it, or they want to use it as an excuse to tax the rich.
Yeah, but that isn't necessary. I mean, we should be taxing the rich because they're rich. Mm-hmm. We don't need an excuse to tax the rich. And I'm not being vindictive when I say that. The reason why we need to tax the rich is that actually they create inequality in society. And inequality has been shown, and I would, quote the example of the spirit level. Just go and look up the book if you aren't familiar with it. Kate Pickett and Richard Wilkinson's book on the impact of inequality on society, which is deeply harmful, not just to those who are suffering at the lower end of the inequality scale, but actually deeply harmful to those who are at the higher end of the wealth and income scale as well.
It undermines democracy as well.
It undermines democracy. So why would we want to actually literally run surpluses and impose austerity, which Labour is promising with this rule? The other alternative interpretation of this rule, which I do think actually Jonathan Portis and Simon Wren-Lewis would have preferred, is that this is actually expressed as a percentage of gross domestic product. In other words, it's not an absolute value. So we would say, well, look, the total deficit is, or the total debt is 2 trillion, but the economy is growing faster than the debt is. So as a percentage of GDP, gross domestic product, that's our national income, which, by the way, is a very imprecise measure. But that's another issue for another day. But that percentage would be falling. That's how they'd interpret this. Well, that's a bit of a wriggle out in some senses as well, but that's what I think they would mean. Either way, it would still impose relative austerity. It would say, we as a Labour government believe that value can only be created by the private sector. It can't be created by the state sector. So we as a Labour government are going to shrink the size of our activity in the economy because we believe that only the private sector can create something of worth. What a very, very strange attitude that is for any Labour government, let alone one that wants to call itself left-wing.
It's almost like they're worried about coming across as too left-wing, so they've gone, look, here's some Blairite stuff. to keep everybody happy. We don't know what it means, but here's a PDF for everyone to look at. We promise we won't spend too much. Bye.
Well, as some people who are listening will know, I've had some history with the Labour Party and Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell. I mean, Corbynomics was pretty much written by me, actually borrowed from me by Andrew Fisher, who wrote Jeremy Corbyn's manifesto for his election in 2015, and by the way, also wrote the Labour Party manifesto in 2017. Now, I've known Andrew for years, and he borrowed the stuff, and I discovered that it became Corbynomics actually entirely after it had already been printed and made his manifesto, which they did, however, ask me to go and speak at the launch of Jeremy Corbyn's economic policy in 2015. And I also then spent quite a lot of time talking to the Labour leadership, and I thoroughly opposed this rule at the time, which I think is really of no use. And I said so quite strongly to the Labour team that this was a mistake. What I heard was that this is a policy to sell on the doorstep. This is not a policy about managing the economy, because it will never be used, because we'll never get out of the zero bound. So therefore, it doesn't matter. We have a let-out clause. This is all just semantics to let us say on the doorstep, oh, we're not going to increase the debt. Oh, except when the zero bound does not let this policy apply, because special circumstances will let us spend anyway. So this is really politics rather than economics, but it's lousy politics because it doesn't represent what a Labour Party government should think, in my opinion. It's lousy economics because, frankly, this is about crushing the economy when Labour should be actually looking at how it can generate, as I think any left-wing government should be doing, full employment at living wage.
It is surprising to me because what I like about Jeremy Corbyn, which is nearly all of it, is that he doesn't play politics. He's very much what you see is what you get.
It seems remarkably safe for him, doesn't it?
Yeah. So I think given that we've got these leftist economists like Simon Wren-Lewis, or nominally leftist economists, is confused about the household analogy, and it wouldn't surprise me if actually that they don't get it. They don't.
I don't think Simon and Jonathan are pretending anything other than where they are. This is what they think. This is what mainstream economics would say.
But they don't get MMT, do they?
They do not get. Well, I think Simon probably does understand what MMT is, but dismisses it because he says monetary policy is quick and effective because you can change the interest rate whenever you like, whatever the consequence for people. The fact that you're going to drive households into absolute poverty and not able to meet the bills at the end of the month because the mortgage has just gone up, which is, by the way, something which actually 40% of mortgage holders in the UK have now never experienced. Think about it. A 25-year mortgage. People who've taken out mortgages in the last 10 years, that's 40% of the life of the average mortgage, have never experienced an interest rate rise of any consequence. So they don't even know what it's like to have. Whereas, when I was younger, and I had mortgages in my life, and at times when interest rates were eye-wateringly high, in the early 90s, for example, and was used to being told, oh, by the way, you've just lost 100 quid out of your pay this month, when 100 quid was worth a lot more than now. But that forced people into real hardship. Now, what they say is, oh, but at least we can make that change to take demand out of the economy, or if we've got to try and balance the books. They say taxes are harder to shift. Now, I don't actually agree with that. I think we can change
politically, VAT. Is that? Do they mean politically?
They say politically, they say practically. They say at best taxes can only be changed once a year. So you can only change the income tax rate once a year. And actually, let's be clear, you can. You can only change the corporation tax rate once a year. Yeah, let's be clear, you can. And you could theoretically say you can only change national insurance once a year, but actually that's not true because national insurance happens on every payday. It does not happen on an annual average, with one or two minor exceptions. I say that to cover myself as an accountant because, I'm rather bizarrely a chartered accountant and an economist. There aren't many people who try to claim both.
I'd like to talk to you offline after this, actually, Richard. Anyway, let's get back to the interview.
The VAT which is a significant tax, can be changed frequently. There is actually no reason why we couldn't change VAT. People say, oh, it's such a nightmare to change everything because prices will change. Well, sorry. But, in an electronic era when prices are largely advertised online, when people run electronic systems and VAT is automatically calculated on a price inside a system, you could change prices frequently. Even in supermarkets, they could change prices overnight. They can. Indeed, we're used to that. We are used to the fact that governments can announce changes in the price of alcohol, beer and tobacco and say it will change from midnight to night. And apparently the system can handle that. So I don't believe that we can't have changes in tax. We could also have change in investment. Because if we did need to stimulate the economy, investment is the best way to do it. By the way, this is the third part of Labour's fiscal credibility rule. I've rather jumped onto that, uninvited by you.
Good.
It says,
Good. I'm glad somebody's in control here, Richard.
Labour will borrow only to invest, it says. That's it. Yeah. They managed to get the will in this time.
There is a distinction made between kind of day-to-day spending and what they consider investment spending. What is the distinction to me, for example, for a policy like the job guarantee? That's day-to-day spending. Correct.
Well, is it? What does the person who has a job guarantee, who goes to work, is that day-to-day spending? What if they've been employed to work on building a hospital? That's investment. What if they've been employed to work on installing solar panels on people's roofs, which is something I would love to see all over the country because solar power is highly effective? What if they're employed to work on creating wind power, which in Scotland has more wind power potential than anywhere else in Europe. It is the Saudi Arabia of Europe for the future, because it literally is just riddled with the opportunity to generate electricity in a way that is denied by everybody unless they have some sympathy with Scottish nationalism. But it's absolutely true. Now, if people are employed on these types of investment projects, they have a job, they have a current income, but actually we're building an asset. Now, what is investment? Investment is simply creating things which are going to have value beyond today. If you go to work and you make, a Mars bar, I don't know why that came to mind, but a Mars bar, I haven't eaten for a long time.
You're thinking about supper already.
I'm thinking about supper. Or, you make a ham sandwich or whatever, cheese sandwich or whatever is your fancy. And it's consumed straight away. Then, look, that is obviously, I made it, I created it, it was consumed. That's current spending. But if you went to work and you worked on building something which is going to last for a long time, and I've just given some examples, that's investment spending, even though we're buying people. And the vast majority of investment spending is actually buying people's labour. And in fact, people say, oh, but what about the raw materials? I'll tell you this. Has iron ever been paid for the use of iron? The answer is no. A landlord has been paid for the use of iron because the iron didn't get the money itself, some other human being did. So, in fact, all money goes around to people. It never gets paid for raw materials. We never pay for raw materials. We just pay landlords. We pay rents. Now, that's why we should tax rents more, because they're unearned. But the reality is that Labour should encourage investment. But why should it only borrow for investment? There are real problems with this policy too. Let's just think that actually we decide the most effective way to put people to work is by building hospitals, for example. So we build lots and lots of hospitals because we think that's a great idea. But because we've actually committed ourselves to cut the size of the deficit and we've committed ourselves to reducing the debt, we can't afford to put any nurses in this hospital built. So we've got an empty hospital, or we've got an empty school, which we can't now afford to put teachers in, or whatever other facility.
Meanwhile, those people that have been put out of work because of this rule, those teachers, those nurses, because we can't increase the deficit, they join the unemployment queue.
Or you have an issue like what you have now.
Minimum pay on a job guarantee. But, crazy. They're not adding value the way they should, using their skills to best advantage. A government should be getting people to use their skills to best advantage. This is just madness to actually invest, but not then commit to using the investment for public good. So the policy makes no economic sense at all. In fact, we can summarize that for all three of these points. It doesn't make economic sense. It isn't going to be used because we're going to be at the zero bound for time to come. And therefore, we're talking about something which is frankly nonsense. And I don't mind what those who defend it say. This is just the politics, the theatre of politics, pretending that Labour is going to be desperately safe with the deficit, when in practice they should be turning around and saying, do you know who's created half of the whole of UK national debt? However we measure it, that's the Tories, by the way. They've done that since 2010. Do you know who's borrowed more over the last 70 years, or 75 years nearly now, than anybody else? Oh, that's the Tories. Do you know that was true before 2008? The Tories always borrowed more than Labour. Do you know who repaid more government debt? Because there has been repayment of government debt over about 7 years since 1945. Do you know who did more of that? Oh, Labour. Do you know who did it in more years? Oh, that was Labour too. Labour has got the stronger record. If you want to talk about fiscal credibility, Labour's already got it. Why is it, therefore, trying to play on Tory territory when this makes no sense from a left-of-centre political perspective as an economic policy or even as politics?
I think what I gather from what I've heard some of the members of the advisory team say, as well as what I've heard John McDonnell himself mention a couple of times, is a fear of a run on the pound. Saying what they mean is that the exchange rate value of the pound would plummet as a result of the additional investment that Labour would make. And it seems to be a real fear with them. And it seems to go back to the 1970s and the issues that Labour had then, as well as the issues that many other socialist countries had with pressure on their currencies due to increased spending or such. So I think that's where they seem to prefer monetary policy, though it's not clear to me why monetary policy would behave any differently. If it did work like they wanted it to work, why would it behave any differently to fiscal policy?
Well, let's go back to the 1970s, first of all, if I can, and just explain that point. I've already talked about why we shouldn't compare with Venezuela now and Weimar Republic in the past. Let's talk about why we can't compare with Dennis Healey, Labour's Chancellor in the 1970s. And I remember all those events happening. That's just when I was studying economics at university, because I'm really old. So my children tell me. I don't feel a day older still. My children point out that I'm really old. Now, in 1976 or thereabouts, when Dennis Healey was having problems with the International Monetary Fund, we had only just worldwide actually come off the gold standard. The gold standard was the old view of money. Now, the UK technically was not on the gold standard, but we'd only just moved away from having a fixed exchange rate with the USA, and the USA was on the gold standard. So simply because the USA was on the gold standard and because we have been used to having fixed exchange rates, literally not this thing we're used to now, where the value of the pound changes every hour, every minute, and it's announced on the news bulletin. No, the value of the pound was £2.40 or $2.40 to the pound for years because that was fixed. Now, that logic is somehow still deep in the psyche of older Labour politicians and maybe older Labour Party members, maybe the whole of society still, because people still think there's something valuable about their note. A lot of people still think you can go into the Bank of England and hand over your £20 note and say, can I have £20, please? And they're going to be given £20 worth of gold. I have to tell you, you won't. You'll be given another £20 note because that's all a £20 note is worth, a £20 note. There is no gold. There's no nothing.
Come on. 4 5s, surely.
Oh, all right. You could have 4 5s and cut pence. You could even cut up a 50 quid note if you wanted and have a bit of it. So long as you got some sellotape to put it back together afterwards. Tesco's take torn up notes, I promise you. I've torn up 20 quid notes to make this point before now.
I saw it. It was glorious. It was great.
Quite a lot of £20 notes of stuff. Of course, my explanations of monetary theory. It's the only one left I can tear up. The other one's plastic. They don't tear. It's really
you tear
annoying.
up the same one every time.
They're on to you. That's why they did it.
But look, come back. So there isn't any value in the note at all. But in the 1970s, we didn't know that. We thought that money was inherently valuable still. We thought that if we actually ran out of money as a country, we would be in deep trouble. We didn't realise our promise to pay pounds was all that there was. We thought we had to have gold in the vaults. Remember all the Ferrari that Gordon Brown sold a whole chunk of the UK's gold in about 2000. And he apparently had trashed the economy by doing this. No, he hadn't. We don't need gold to run an economy because gold has no relationship to the value of the pound. They're not literally linked events. So somehow deep inside Labour thinking is this, Dennis Healey had to run to the IMF and we can never be seen to do that again. John McDonnell, I have to say, is also a special case. I'm sure John will be glad to hear me say that. But John is a special case because he learnt his economics of running a government, in a sense, as the treasurer of the Greater London Council. Of course, in the 1980s, when Ken Livingstone was leading the council, John was actually running its finances. But councils cannot print money. Mm-hmm. They are actually
create money.
Which word? They cannot create money. They are completely bound by the money they can get in. They're like households. They're like companies. If they can't get money in, they can go bust. And we've seen that at present. Northamptonshire Council in the UK is bust. Councils could go bust. Governments who can create their own money cannot. I think John still has somewhere deep inside him the memory that Thatcher could turn his income off, and therefore the GLC was under threat of going bust if the government removed the money flow. This isn't true of the UK economy. Suppose we invest now. I'm going to actually commit the sin of doing a household analogy at this precise moment. Only I'm going to do it in a comparison with a company in a globalized world. A company that says there are real opportunities to increase our income in the future by investing in new assets, new skills, training people and so on, is actually the darling of the market. I mean, look at Apple. I mean, what has Apple done? It's invested in new products, new skills, developed new technologies, blah, blah, sometimes with the help of the state, let's be clear, but we'll ignore that. As they do, always. The state has no role in their success, even though it really has to a very great degree.
Yeah, the Pentagon's in there somewhere, right?
It very definitely is in there. Now, companies who invest are doing the right thing. Why would markets turn around and say if a country was investing, oh, that's a disaster, we're going to pull our money out? They would only do that if they said the investment was a disaster. I mean, they might have a few days of a wobble. Well, wobbles happen in financial markets and people can survive them, and the UK has all the resources to survive a wobble in the market. But it wouldn't last for long. Why not? Because actually markets are actually, and I hate to say this, a little more sensible than that. They reappraise the long term, they do it, and they move on. They reappraised, for example, the value of the pound after the Brexit vote. They decided the UK was now worth 10% less than it was before the Brexit vote. They readjusted the value of the pound, and we all moved on. Did we suffer? Did we have a collapse?
Oh, you must remember the queues for Marmite. It was like Russia under Stalin. You must remember.
We had a little bit of inflation for a year.
Like
and it all went on as if nothing had happened. 10% move in the value of the currency. How much is the value of the pound going to move because we decide to build some hospitals or invest in schools or, something like that, or decide to electrify our railways or whatever it might be? The value of the pound may move by 3%. It won't matter. That could happen overnight to any currency. Nobody will notice. We aren't simply going to get this run. It's just a figment of an imagination. It's a play game that you can put on the blackboard in an economics classroom and say it could happen. But will it happen in reality? No, there's not a hope. Not a hope. Because actually, and let me explain why investment is a good thing. there's a thing called the fiscal multiplier. This is a slightly odd concept. When a government spends money, as I've already explained, it's somebody else's income. If you listen to every Conservative politician, you would think that if a government spends money, it's just poured down a black hole, which is the money's never seen again. It's wasted. It's gone. Nobody ever gets any of it. Nobody actually lives off it. Nobody spends it. It is just like taking it to a waste tip and pouring it into reprocess landfill site or something.
They literally mention black holes in their journalist coverage. They do.
Yeah. This is like filling landfill with money. It isn't. It actually, of course, the government spends it. It's somebody else's income. Now, depending on what you spend it on, curiously, you can stimulate the economy more or less. If you spend it all on paying, for example, for investment, the bizarre thing is that the amount of money you can actually stimulate the economy by is 2 or 3 times the amount that the government spends. In other words, over time, that creates an investment return. And in fact, the government can actually stimulate the economy by more than its own level of spending. And the evidence is it can be 2 to 3 times. Now, if the government gets 2 to 3 times the stimulus for the amount it's spent, and the tax rate is around 33%, investment spending actually is fully paid for out of new taxes generated. There are obviously exceptions to that. There is very clear evidence that if you give tax cuts, which in this sense are identical to government spending, a tax cut is the same as government spending in economic terms, because
Except we're going here, private sector, you figure it out.
Yeah, but
I'm not opposed to that. I'm just
those actually do not stimulate the economy in the same way. In fact, the government could actually give a tax cut of 10 billion, and it does not stimulate the economy, but on average by more than 3 or 4 billion. This idea that tax cuts stimulate the economy is wrong. They actually, they do a little bit, but by nothing like the amount that the government's given up. In other words, you're all worse off, because you remember the government spending, which it now isn't spending, isn't somebody else's income, and you're actually net worse off. So if the world at large, the world outside the UK, the people who do actually literally leave their money here, because very large quantities of foreign money is in the UK, saw that the UK is going to be investing, making a stronger, wealthier economy where people have literally more in their pockets to spend on goods and services which they're going to sell to them at a profit. Do you think everybody's going to run out of the UK when there's a profit opportunity being generated by the UK government? No, they're not going to do that.
Another way I like to say it is, okay, if you believe that other nations are going to punish us for our fiscal decisions, or they can punish us for any decisions, what would be better? Should we, increase our real wealth so that we've got something to trade with, or should we keep cutting back so that we're showing the rest of the world, hey, come and invest here because everybody's really insecure and they'll work for peanuts? I think the first case is better.
Well, that's just not a message that a socialist government should have, or accept.
I mean, it doesn't make any sense because I'm quoting Seth Godin, who's a business writer. He would say, the problem with the race to the bottom is you might win. And then even worse, you might come second.
And we don't need a race to the bottom. We need a race to the top. We actually want to have the best infrastructure, the best trained people, the best facilities to create wealth for our long term. And if we do that, and governments have to be a critical part of that process because we live in a mixed economy. This is the other thing that we've really got to remember. Wealth in the economic sense of exchange seems to be created best when private and public sector work together. And they recognize that partnership. Again, Labour should be doing that. They shouldn't be saying, we won't spend, we won't increase the deficit. If that's the right thing to do to partner the private sector in releasing the potential of the economy. Why don't we want to have the best? Why don't we want to actually improve the well-being of people in this country? Why don't we want to spend to get to that result? Why would that worry the rest of the world? It wouldn't, because they would just see a massive profit opportunity in partnership with the UK government that was investing in this way.
Yeah, my concern is that who are we trying to appease with that message? Is it the bankers? Is it the financial markets? And why do we feel so helpless in the face of them?
We're trying to appease journalists on the Mail, on the Express, on the Sun, who can only understand their household analogy, who've never had any training in economics, and who say, oh, if we don't cut our spending to balance the budget, we're going to go bust. It's just not true. They have no understanding of the true nature of money. They don't understand that tax does not finance government spending. It's actually government spending reclaimed. They don't understand that we can actually create money as a government if we need to. They don't understand that actually investment by a government is just as good as investment by a company, which they will sing to the praises on the finance pages at exactly the same time as they'll be saying a government shouldn't be doing it. They just don't understand. And unfortunately, they have spread this message that government equals bad, private sector equals good, private sector must run profits, which aren't balanced budgets, of course. Government sector must not run any form of deficit, which is, of course, an unbalanced budget in exactly the same way in many ways as a government is doing, because government and private sector are equal and opposites. Remember, everything in life is equal and opposites. In accounting terms and in economic terms, everything is equal and opposites. And what we need is that creative partnership between these two sectors, individuals, communities, government, businesses, which I'm not inherently opposed to. I don't know a successful economy in the world. There's never been a successful economy which does not have private enterprise of some sort, working within very clear rules, which make sure that it's honest, upright, pays its taxes, creates products which are safe for everyone to use, but nonetheless does work within those rules. Then we can actually create a really vibrant economy. We had that. This is the economy that actually powered the whole development in the post-war period, when we built 500,000 social housing units a year, when we built schools, when we built hospitals and everything else. We transformed the UK. And ever since we stopped this partnership working, which is the basis of what I think modern socialism really is, because it embraces everyone working in harmony, then everything went wrong.
And I know a number of the advisors actually support the rule on the basis that it's both harmless and politically useful. But when you read particularly Simon Wren-Lewis's papers supporting the rule, you do see that even though it surprises me because he does claim to understand MMT, he does say repeatedly that you need, a deficit. Governments have deficit biases, and that you need to tackle it because. Can
I say that deficit bias thing as well?
Yeah,
I mean that's very.
Basically,
it's Orwellian, isn't it? Because it's like we know bias is bad, so the word next to bias must also be bad. So you guys are biased towards deficits, whereas we just spent the first bit of this interview trying to get people over the hurdle of understanding. The government deficit is our surplus, and
yes.
And people, and so people just hear deficit, or we got to get rid of it because I'd hate to have a deficit, so the government should hate to have a deficit, and it's all backwards.
Yeah, but Simon,
destroying the deficit would destroy private wealth.
Yeah,
precisely.
We are deficit biased. I am very biased in favour of a deficit. It's a good thing.
But his point is, at least it appears to me to be that that lobbying pressures on government will mean that governments always spend too much, and I don't know too much compared to what he means exactly, but he does seem to think. He says that a deficit bias is not good, and I quote, for a variety of reasons. The most straightforward is that more taxes need to be raised to pay the interest on that debt. Yet we know that interest on debt is always paid with new money.
Exactly. So it's not... Yeah,
it's not only always paid with new money, but as I pointed out, actually, at the moment, the government effectively borrows at a negative interest rate. I know cash goes to the people that the money is technically borrowed from, but the fall in the value of their debt is greater than the amount that they're paid in interest. In other words, they're giving money to the government when they lend to it. We don't pay interest because at the end of the day, actually, all government debt is recycled. It does go round and is technically redeemed. And the amount it's redeemed at is less than the overall cost of borrowing it. If you add up the total price, now it could be less than the original cost of borrowing. So, this is absurd. What it actually says, I hate to say this, and I don't like to say it, but it shows a complete lack of faith in government. It says, I don't trust government to run an economy.
He implicitly says a fiscal rule is a device to discourage deficit bias.
Yes, because I don't trust governments to spend. I don't trust governments to choose wisely. I don't trust people to choose a good government. I don't believe that an elected government can make as good a decision as a pile of bankers in Threadneedle Street. I'm sorry, I simply don't agree. And I really think, and perhaps this is a good point to end this, but I really think that it's actually Labour's job to say, yeah, we will run the economy better than a pile of bankers. And look at the evidence. Bankers haven't done very well for some time, have they? We could do better than that. We don't need to dress in their clothing, which is what this fiscal credibility rule is, to pretend to you we can be as good as bankers, because bankers are pretty goddamn awful at what they've been doing of late.
Yeah, absolutely. We definitely deserve better.
We do.
He does. I mean, he does have a particularly like for kind of a technocratic approach to government, if I may say so. Yeah. He does speak of fiscal councils advising government on limits on spending. So it is scattered all over. But
there's a sense of I can't quite believe in democracy and all of that. And again, there's a certain degree of elitism, I'm afraid to say, which I don't really feel comfortable with. Again, it doesn't fit easily.
Well, let's hope.
And I say this, knowing full well that I'm a professor, I'm a chartered accountant, I'm all these things. I don't feel comfortable, however, thinking that would give me the right to tell a government what to do when it's got the power of a democratic mandate behind it. Why should they give me the right to choose rather than actually, they can ask my advice, yeah, by all means, but the politician should be making the decision, in my opinion. Let's not outsource this to a pile of experts. In this sense, I'm with Michael Gove. Let's not trust the experts. Very bizarre.
Oh my God, I'm definitely
not him.
We're going to edit that out for sure.
It's not very often I agree with Michael Gove, but actually,
though it would be. I mean,
my politicians. I want my politicians to believe that they can make the decisions. And do you know what? I was brought up in an era when I did believe politicians could make decisions, and we now have a poverty in that sense, a real poverty of aspiration amongst politicians. I wrote about it in one of my books, The Courageous State. I described the cowardly state, which is my opposite of the courageous state. And the cowardly state, I said, was the politicians who actually look at any problem and run away from it and say the market can sort that out for us. Well, that's exactly what we've had with regards to monetary policy, economic policy and everything else. The market will do it for us. No, it won't.
Yeah,
the market doesn't solve anything.
It's almost like they work so hard to get a mandate, to get your votes. They pay fortunes, they employ PR people, and as soon as they get it, they look for every way to divest their responsibility of running the economy.
Yeah.
It's not me, a market did it.
I really hope.
There's also, let's go again back to the rule. What I really don't like about it is I think it's dishonest. Because it doesn't tell people what is going to happen if Labour is in office. I remember a poem I learned as really quite young, and I'm not going to get the wording precisely right, but it was basically the school kid in the playground saying, I want to be your leader. Will you make me your leader? Please, will you make me your leader? Thank you for making me your leader. What shall we do now? That's what this rule says. I want to be your leader. I have no idea what I'll do when I get there, but it won't be this. In that sense, this is dishonest. And I don't like it for that reason either. I want Labour to be honest about the fact it believes in the role. And I know Jeremy Corbyn. I mean, I've spoken to meetings with Jeremy Corbyn. I've been his warm-up act. I've seen the man in action.
Tough crowd.
Yeah, tough crowd. I've done 1,200 people, warming up for Jeremy Corbyn. Nottingham, Norwich, and others. We're
sure he understands some MMT, or is that a rumour going around?
I think Jeremy probably understands this more than John McDonnell.
That's interesting.
But the interesting point about Jeremy when he was running for Labour Party leader was there was a deep honesty, which frankly was why the others who were standing against him just fell flat on their faces. Because they just, Andy Berman, Liz Kendall, Yvette Cooper, they just weren't up to the job of challenging his honesty. In a very real way, this man had integrity.
Yeah, he did.
And people warmed to it. I saw it. And I even joked about it in public at that time. The audience just loved it when I joked that I'd asked him to be the model for the front cover of my book, The Joy of Tax. I wanted a man with a beard, and there was one standing in the wings waiting to come on. But they liked his integrity. This is not a reflection of that integrity. It's an old model. It's a false model. This is from the Labour spin era. This is, back to Mandelson. Wow, why are we doing a back to Mandelson economic?
Don't say his name 3 times, whatever.
Oh, the Prince of Darkness will come and see us, would it?
I mean, Jeremy Corbyn. What attracted me to his leadership was he was bold, and he would talk unashamedly about government creating money, and if they can do it for bankers, why not for people? And
he adopted lock, stock, and barrel my idea of people's quantitative easing.
Yeah.
I mean, I created this idea. I mean, I actually called it green quantitative easing. If truth be told, I probably thought Caroline Lucas was going to use it more than Jeremy was. But then nobody had ever imagined that Jeremy might be standing for leader of the Labour Party when I wrote the idea in 2010. But he adopted it lock, stock and barrel. And people's quantitative easing was about creating money to invest in the economy to create the long-term sustainable growth that would deliver prosperity for this country. He used that as an absolute linchpin of his campaign to be Labour Party leader. And since then, it's been denied that this was anything to do with them. John McDonnell has said in Parliament that I don't have credibility as a macroeconomist, even though my ideas on macroeconomics were what made Jeremy, or helped make Jeremy, I don't claim single-handedly, of course, for a moment, but helped make Jeremy party leader, I think. And yet, now there's this denial. I really, really don't get it.
They've watered down his economic platform, and I'm not sure...
Not watered it down, changed it fundamentally.
That was the MMT Podcast with Patricia Pino and Christian Riley. You can get in touch with us on Twitter at MMT Podcast, or I'm at Christ Riley, spelled ChristReilly. And Patricia is at Patricia N. Pino, spelled PatriciaNPino. You can also email me at christriley@outlook.com. Thanks for listening, and we hope to hear from you. I'm just interested. What is your mum's maiden name? Just to get the ball rolling.
Where did I first go to school? What's my date?
To get the full picture.
My first pet's name.
Yeah.
My father's middle name.
I hate it when people hide in interviews.
When are we starting recording? Is all this on tape?
Yeah. No. Yes, but I will delete it.